Welcome back. If you have followed me for a couple videos, you should know that I have been working on a short URL service or system based on Laravel or a Laravel application as a short URL service. This is not a production ready application. The idea is that I want to show you how to develop a real application that the feature can be used or can be familiar to yourself. So in previous video, I have already created a Laravel 9 project with inertia and byte support. If you are not aware of this project, feel free to check out my previous video. I think the link will be on the top right corner there, so click that card or link to check out the video on how I set up the project. Okay, that's the topic today. I'm going to show you the real short URL feature in the application. So I have already completed the coding part. So I will walk you through the key steps to implement such feature. So from the screen, you should be able to see some very basic elements on the page. By the way, so the UI is developed on top of the UI framework called ElementPlus. Again, if you're not familiar with it or you have no idea how to integrate ElementPlus with Laravel project, feel free to again look up to the top right corner and click the information card. So there's a video talking about the ElementPlus framework integration with the Laravel project. Okay, let's come back to the main topic today, the short URL service. There are loads of blogs, posts, and videos talking about how to do the system design of the short URL service. So I'm not going to walk you through the options, the different solutions. So if you are interested, feel free to check them out. So today I'm going to show you one of the solution. Generally, when user enters some long URL here in the text area or the input box here, we want to create or generate a unique token or ID or hash value for it. Anyway, it should be unique to that URL. So the key point is how to create such a unique ID or key or token. We say token. Option 1 is that we can reuse the auto-generated ID or key in the, for example, MySQL database. That's the probably the way we can take. The other option is to, for example, use UUID. The last thing or the solution I'm going to take today is to use some distributed ID generation service or generator. There are some discussions there talking about the pros and cons on different distributed ID generation service or algorithm. So we are not going to talk about them today. I'm simply going to use the Twitter Snowflake algorithm to generate the ID. So this is a service I stand up for the short URL system. It's developed in Java. It's and based on the open source library called tool. So this is a dependency I add to the Java project. I name it as a Snowflake ID generator. It's up and running in my local environment on port 8080. So what this API is doing is simply return you a string, a unique ID, which is a Java long type decimal. It means that this is an 8 bytes number. So it's a string representation. Okay, so this is how I'm going to generate a unique ID for the short URL service, or for each long URL. If you are not familiar with Twitter Snowflake algorithm, feel free to check it out. Twitter Snowflake algorithm. You should see a lot of discussions. So it's also part of the scalable unique ID generator topic. Okay. So from the page here, you can see for each long URL, we will have a unique short URL or unique token or ID for it, which is generated by this external or remote API service. I also have a video talking about how this Snowflake ID generator service is developed. Again, feel free to look up to the top right corner. Check out the information card or the video. By following that, you should be able to run the same thing in your local dev environment and power your, if you are doing the same thing, your short URL service. Okay, now let's look into what we really need to do, or what I really did to implement all this stuff. Now let's look into a code base. You see here, I have already created a separate branch called feature/short URL generation. I'm going to make a PR in my repo, so you can look into that PR and see what exactly I did. Again, this is not a production ready application or product. It's just a POC or proof of concept. To run a real short URL service, you need a big distributed system to serve the potential massive traffic. But let's see the concept here today. First of all, we need some database table to store the long URL to token or short URL mapping. So what we need to do is, what I did is to make a new model called short URL, in which I also create the controller. So this is a command I use, PHP artisan make model short URL. In this command, it will also produce a new migration file. This is the migration file I used. Let's look into the migration. Interesting, where is the migration file? This guy. Okay. Yeah, I run I removed the model and run the command again, so it's not the same migration file name as you see on the screen. Actually, it's a bit later. It's with a later timestamp here, so it doesn't matter. Once you run the make model command, you should see a new migration file in your local code base. So this is what I did. I add a couple of columns to the table. essentially long URL for the original user input, a token from the token service. In my implementation, I'm going to implement a remote API powered token service. I'll show you quickly. So this column is set to unique. And we want to add a foreign key to the user ID column so that it's associated with users table. And I set it to nullable, which means anonymous users can also use our short URL system service. Okay, nullable or not, it totally depends on your requirement and your product features. If you don't want any anonymous users to use it, so probably you don't have to set it to nullable here. Okay, so this is the short URLs. Once you complete this step, you run PHP artisan migrate, which will populate the schema change to the database. So in the database, you should see a new table here. I have already created some short URLs, so these are the information I have now. Okay, I think that's it for the migration. Once we complete, we need to look into the model short URL. Depending on how you develop your application, so there are multiple ways to create a short URL instance or model instance. So here, what I did is to add a fillable field, protected variable, with the columns I like to fill by the application, and also add the function user, which returns the user of the short URL using the belongs to relationship here. It's not used for now, but I just put it there. Okay, this is the model. Now we have the model, the database change. Now let's look into the controller. If you have watched my previous video, I already set up a short URL controller, so there's some conflict when I run the command php artisan make model short URL with the controller option. So it's to create a controller. So there's conflict. So I renamed the old controller to short URL2. So you can ignore it for now. This is the short URL controller created by the php artisan make model command with -mcr option. I copied the same index function from the short URL2 controller, which will show the same inertia index page. So I don't need to change too much. So this is the controller. I'm going to talk more about the implementation here. But before that, we have the model, the controller class, and we go to the web.php, the roots. I removed the old root I set up in previous video. I changed it to resource roots. So in this way, we have the standard resource roots enabled in the application. For example, get short URL, post short URL, stuff like that. And in our controller, we just need to implement the corresponding functions. If we don't need them for now, we can leave them blank. Okay, so these are the roots. Another root I set up is the short URL. Remember that when we use a popular short URL service, when we create a short URL and we access in the browser, it will redirect us to the destination or the original long URL. So that how it works. So I define a similar root here, /s/token. So this token has some restriction. It has to it can only have alphanumeric characters here. As you see, I use the expression here. And what it does is to call the redirect function in the short URL controller. I'll go through the real features or the root later. Okay, now we have the root set up. So before we look into the real short URL service, let me show you one thing is the environment setup. As we are running the ID generating service as a separate API, so we need to make an API HTTP call from the Laravel project to that service, ID generator service. So I added a new variable in the .env point to the API ID generator service API endpoint. So this is what we can reuse in the code base. Okay, that's everything we need before we start looking to the real service, the short URL service. Now let's see a couple things for the real service. So I create a new folder, services folder, and define a couple service. Firstly, it's a token service. This is an interface we'd like to have in the project. The only function in the service called next token, so it's going to return a valid token. I have one implementation here in the subdirectory Snowflake called Snowflake token service. This is to implement a token service interface. In the implementation, I'm going to get the endpoint from the environment variable and then make the HTTP GET request. In the response or the successful response, I can get the token from the value field or property. So this is a simple implementation. Pay more attention here is that the token returned or ID returned is a string. So I need to convert it to an integer value. So this is why here we are using the int val function here. Now we have the service. This is the token service. The service will return a unique token or ID every time. The other service we need is the base 62 service. It's not an interface now, just simply a class. This is for the token. We want to encode, otherwise it's pretty long. As you can see here, it's much longer than we need. So short URL, we want to keep it short. So in practice, a lot of methods can be used, for example, MD5. And in our case, and this is also the mechanism introduced and suggested by the different short URL service design videos or posts or blogs. So character numbers and alphabetics. So all these characters, there are 62 characters. So we use 62 characters to encode the decimal. In this way, it would be much shorter. So you can look into this implementation, the algorithm. Actually, if you search online, you will see pretty much the same code in different programming languages, say Python or JavaScript. So once we give a decimal to the encode function, it will return us encoded string, something like what we have in the database now. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So it's an 11 character string. So it's shorter than the original decimal. Okay, that's it. That is how we can encode the token. Actually, if you look into the mainstream short URL service out there, they can give us a much shorter URL or the token. For now, it's just 7 characters. So if you want to compete with them to make the URL extremely short, you may need to come up with some better encoding solution to make it shorter. Otherwise, in current implementation with the Twitter and Snowflake algorithm, the token might be up to 11 characters. But if you're okay with this length, that's totally fine. Okay, so this is a token service. We have these two services. They will be used by the short URL controller. So when we receive a request to create a short URL, for example, in the store function, this is what I did. We need to use the token service and the encode service, which is the base622 service. How can they be injected into the function? So this is a feature provided or supplied by the Laravel container, service container. If you're not familiar with this feature or dependency injection in Laravel, again, look up to the top right corner and check out the video about this topic. I talked about it several months ago, so it's worth you looking to it and see how it's done. Essentially, it's part of the service provider, app service provider. This is where you can bind the implementation or dependency to some interface, bind it to the Laravel service container. In this way, we set them to singletons, so there will be only one instance in the container. After that, we are able to simply declare the parameters here in the function, and they will be injected by Laravel container, so we are able to use it. If you look into the app service provider again, so this token service, we bind the Snowflake token service implementation to the interface. So this is how we are using it. In the future, if we want to switch to different token generator service, so we can change the binding here. Okay, this is the service. Now, probably the last step. So this is where we want to create a short URL for the user input. So this store function is used or associate with root short URL dot store. So this is a post endpoint. When user posts the request, we need the client to pass the long URL as an input. In this case, we receive the long URL from the request. We fetch the user ID from the authorized user, and we get a new or next unique ID or token from the token service. We pass the token to the base622 service to encode, so that we have a shorter encoded token. Now it's time to create a short URL data entry in the database. We use the model create function with long URL token user ID. Now we have the data in database if everything goes well. The last step is redirect the user to the short URL index route, which is essentially this page. So this route is populated by the resource route in the web.php. If you are not familiar with the root or the resource root, feel free to check out my previous video. I also talk about it, about root. So that's also top right corner. So that's it. And we have everything ready for the front-end page. Okay, now let's look into the front end. Remember that we have the index.view. So this is the page view template for this page. And I put a form on the left, a table on the right, the form for user to enter the long URL and submit to create a short URL. On the right is the user's URL, but for now I list all the URL in the system. So let's see how these short URLs are populated to the page. So in the short URL controller, you see here in the index function, I fetch all the entries from the database and convert them to the short URL resource. So this is a class I created here. It extends JSON resource class. What I implement is the toArray function. As we have the token in database, so I want to allow the client easily render the short URL. They don't need to know about the where the application is hosted and what's the listening port. So I want the application to wrap up and return the short URL to the client for rendering. So this is how we can do the model transformation. So that's resource, that's what's resource for. And I also convert the timestamp to a human readable format. It's a string. So this is what the resource can do for us. Once we implement such resource, then we can use it something like short URL resource collection. So it will convert all the entries to an array collection. Now we populate the data, the URL entries to the short URL property of the view component. Let's come back to the view component here. You see here the property short URLs accept the data populated by the controller. It's an object. And I used the ElementPlus table component to render the data. The data is from short URL property. Remember that from the short URL resource, this class, the array returned, the actual data is in the data key. So we need to use short-else.data to access the actual rows, data rows. And we can use the column and template to render. So feel free to check out the code and see how I use the data populated by the inertia controller. So this is how we render this table. Now let's look into the form, how user can create a short URL. The form is here. We use the ElementPlus form. We bind the model to the form. The model is defined here. So in data, it returns an object with form. So this is an inertia form. The only field in the form is long URL. By default, it's null. So we bind the form to the ElementPlus form, and the input is bind to form long URL. So it's reactive. And we have the submit callback or handler defined here. It's a store function. It does the only thing here. You can see we post the data, the form to short URL. So post short URL is served by the resource root. So this is how, and it will call the store function in the short URL controller, which is I just introduced. So this is how it's working from the client side to the server side. You may need to look into inertia form section on how to submit a form. There are some options for you to use. So options. So this is how you can use a form in inertia. So feel free to check out. So this is how to submit a form in inertia. Okay, once it's successful, we want to reset the user input, the input box to the default state, which is blank. So we reset. So this is the onSuccess callback to the post function. Okay, I think that's pretty much it. There are also a lot of things on the view component, like the different ElementPlus components, the row, the column, form item, and the tabs, tab panel, table, all these components. Feel free to check out the Vue 3 UI framework ElementPlus and components here. This is where you can check out all the components you can use. So I'm not going to go through all these details. And yeah, that's pretty much it. And once it's completed, you can start putting something in the user input box and see if it's working for you. Now let's copy this URL and paste in the box, create. Now you can see here, this link, this short URL will redirect user to the ElementPlus documentation page, the bottom section. Now if I click, yeah, it goes to the correct destination. Okay, you can ignore the menu here, it does nothing. I think that's it for today. Again, this is just a POC, proof of concept. I don't think you should use it for any production environment, but feel free to build your short URL service based on this concept. You can do some design to make it distributed and capable of massive traffic. Okay, good luck, guys. I will submit the code to the repository and share the PR in the video description. Feel free to check that out. If you have any question, feel free to comment below. Remember to subscribe to the channel, thumbs up, and ring the bell. You will see me soon. Thanks again. See you next time. Bye bye.